We welcome the Taoiseach and we call on Deputy Pearse Doherty, please.
Gurmaigad Chan Corlia agus Queen Realta Shot and Gerkim Tihiakte Emaha or Al Gudi Ruddy Nismasa agus Sampla Ella Dan Chipshaw na and Skiel and Chartonshaw Nuyart Gasnai and Tihi Enaquinia Tihi or Price Racente or Wahar Oscar Trainer Suhulag Suesla Kirikade Chartmo Quick €1,000,000 shot chip an Realtas Tihi Enaquinia a Halahar agus Chipperisht an Realtas Ohio and Policy Tihi Ataku a Genush Nis Jackret Ogolordini. Taoiseach, under this government, you know that house prices have soared. You also know that home ownership are falling. For too many, buying a home is simply unaffordable in this state. When Darragh O'Brien took office as Minister for Housing, he said that one of his key objectives was to deliver affordable homes for people and families to purchase, to give hope back to young people so that they can aspire to own their own family home. They were his words. He talked a big game. But the question is, what is affordable in the eyes of the Minister, or indeed you, Taoiseach? In October 2020, Dublin City Councillors voted down a controversial deal to sell public land at Oscar Traynor Road to a private developer. The deal was rejected because it would make it impossible to deliver affordable homes for working people to buy. Sinn Féin had long campaigned for the government to fund Dublin City Council to deliver affordable and social homes on this very site, but Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael governments refused to provide the funding. Instead, you wanted the public land sold to the developer, which we warned you would lead to unaffordable prices and rip-off rents. When the vote came, Fine Gael, as they do, supported it, Sinn Féin opposed it, and your party was split down the middle, with 4 councillors voting against it. In desperation, the government leaned on Dublin City Council, and a promise was made that 3-bedroom homes would be sold for between €250,000 to €306,000. Fianna Fáil got in line and supported the bad deal, and the land was sold. So fast forward to today, Taoiseach, 2024, and this week, Dublin City Council announced the prices what this government describes as affordable homes in Oscar Traynor Road will be sold for. €400,000 is the lowest cost that people will pay for a 3-bedroom home. It will go up to €475,000. €309,000 is what people will pay up to for a 1-bedroom home in Oscar Traynor Road in Coolock. And you call this your affordable housing scheme. It is bonkers. This is the Minister and the government's idea of affordability. It is astonishing that people will be wondering if you're living in a parallel universe, Minister. Because the question is, how out of touch can you get if you think that these prices are affordable? How can anybody stand over a scheme that offers a 3-bedroom home for prices between €400,000 and €475,000 and call it affordable? We warned you that this plan would lead to homes that were unaffordable, that were out of reach of ordinary people, and we were right. But Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil refused to listen and to look at now where we are today. We now have the ludicrous result of what was promised as affordable homes on state-owned land in the state being now sold for up to €475,000. And the people in Coolock, and I know many of them, who are desperate to buy a home in the communities that they were born in for a future for themselves and their families, are now looking at developing their backyard that they can never aspire to own a home in. So, Taoiseach, the question to you is, do you believe that €475,000 for a 3-bedroom home in Coolock is affordable? A very simple question. Do you regret your support for this deal? Do you accept that this was not only a bad deal for people who want affordable homes, but a terrible deal for the taxpayer? And will you now stop your policy of gifting public land to developers and support councils and approved housing bodies delivering real affordable homes on public land?
Ní ein tíim an écha leis an hachtsa agus nílan méid a dúirt sé crín nó ní sé mechánta, tá sé mí mechánta. Agus is léir go bhfuil aspa policy de Forty Sinn Féin I ggóthés cuasaí tíochta. Bhí sé bheith gcuine annachhuid scéimeanna in Oscar Traynor agus le fada na blianta. You were against the building of houses in Oscar Traynor for well over a decade. And the bottom line in your presentation, it's interesting, you omitted to say that the scheme that was approved by Dublin City Council, first of all, meant for 20% affordable, 40% social and 40% cost rental. So of the 853, you're talking about 20% affordable, 40% social, 40% cost rental. Why didn't you mention the 40% social? Why didn't you mention the 40% cost rental? But let's take the advertised prices and let's take your figures of 400,000. The advertised prices are 264,000 for a one-bed, 356,000 for a two-bed, and 399 for a three-bed home. Now, those prices are 100,000 lower than the market price at the moment. Just bear that in mind, because of schemes that the government introduced to support providers. But let's go further. Let's take the first home scheme, which you opposed, the shared equity scheme. Anyone purchasing that can get up to 100,000. They can get up to 100,000, which brings the price and the affordability down to 300,000. They can then get 30,000 euros in terms of the help to buy. So you're looking at a much reduced price in respect of what's been presented by the Deputy. And again, they're the first houses that are coming on scene on that particular scheme. There's 40% social and there's 40% cost rental. And the cost rentals are 25% below market value. Now, that site was left vacant for decades. It was a scandal that that site was left vacant. In my view, because of ideologically driven policies by Sinn Féin and by others, objecting serially all of the time. And the point I would make is this: Sinn Féin's equity scheme, for example, it's interesting because home ownership matters and we believe in home ownership. We didn't believe that the site should be 100% social, which you did. We didn't believe in that. We don't believe in 100% social scheme. We believe there should be a balance, and we believe home ownership matters. Your schemes, in many respects, given the cap of 80,000 on your shared equity scheme, for example, you could never own a house if you were a guard, married to a nurse or whatever like that. That's a fact. You put an 80,000 cap on it, and you would get rid of the shared equity scheme, and you get rid of the first home scheme. And that's the bottom line.
Deputy Doherty.
Well, look, the answer is you are living in a parallel universe, and you actually don't even know your own housing policy. You stood there and tried to justify it, and I understand your dilemma, because you ask you a simple question. Do you believe that the houses that you are delivering in Oscar Traynor Road, which is entry price €400,000 for a three-bedroom house, and it goes up to 475, is affordable? You can't answer that simple question, because you know that to say yes is absolutely daft, and you know to say no shows up that you are completely failing ordinary people. So what do? You mislead the Dáil. You suggest that you can use the first home scheme to reduce the price by 100,000. You cannot do that. The problem here is this: your policy is about gifting public land to private developer. This scheme should be 100% affordable. Social housing and affordable homes. Now, I ask you the question very simply: is €400,000 affordable for a three-bedroom home in Coolock, in your view? And it goes up to 475. It could have been affordable. O'Coolan this month has delivered three-bedroom affordable purchase homes in Ballymun at purchase prices of 264 to 295,000. Why? Because it's not for profit, because the land was kept public, because the right thing was done. Your policy is pushing up prices beyond the reach of anybody. So just answer one question. Do you believe that the advertised price of €400,000 is affordable for a family purchasing a three-bedroom home in Coolock? That's a simple question.
400,000. That's the point. It's 100,000 already below market value. And when someone buys that house, they're in a house. They will have acquired a house for 100,000 below the market value. They will have availed of schemes that will increase their capacity to afford that house by about 130,000 if you go the full distance on the first home scheme, and if you take the help to buy of 30,000. You didn't mention once, Deputy, through the Chair, you didn't mention once the help to buy scheme. You've opposed it from day one. That would benefit anybody buying an affordable house. And you have never supported development in Oscar Traynor. And you're obfuscating and you're prevaricating. You won't accept the basic fact that the schemes the government have brought in through the first home scheme and through the help to buy scheme significantly improve an individual or a couple's a couple's capacity to make a house affordable, in this case from about 400,000 to 270,000 in terms of the amount that a person would have to pay out. And that is something I think significant. And that covers right across the board.
Deputy Doherty.
But you would get rid of those schemes. You would get rid of those schemes if you went into government. And any first-time buyer out there needs to be aware that Sinn Féin would undermine their capacity to buy houses into the future by getting rid of Help to Buy and by getting rid of the first home scheme. Because you don't really believe in home ownership. Deputy O'Brien, you don't believe in home ownership. Tell the truth. You don't believe in home ownership.
You're bringing in you don't charade, please. Deputy O'Brien. Deputy O'Brien. Deputy O'Brien. You're letting yourself down. You're letting yourself down, sir. Now, this is now. We don't need anything from the government side. We want an end to your strategic heckling. Please, let's conduct ourselves with a bit of decorum. Deputy Ged Nash, please. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. No, there's no points of order on leaders' questions. Resume your seat. No, resume your seat. Resume your seat. Resume your seat.
That's fine. But I would like to know at some stage after leaders' questions, when the Taoiseach deliberately misleads the House, what
do not accuse
opposition have?
Do not accuse a colleague of deliberately misleading.
I am accusing him. I am absolutely fully accusing him of deliberately.
The way that should be done, the way that should be done, if you wish to go down that road, is by way of formal motion, not by way of accusation on the floor of the House. So if you have a motion you want to table the motion. Now, please, we're going to hear Deputy Nash. Deputy Nash, please. I tell you what, if there's sorry, excuse me. I will suspend the House if this continues. I'll suspend the House. Please don't make me do that. Deputy Nash, please.
Dereliction is a disease. It's insidious. It destroys communities. And nothing saps the confidence of a town like dilapidated, derelict, dangerous buildings. Vacancy, unchecked, is the gateway drug to dereliction. There are nearly 2,000 derelict sites in Ireland, and they're just the ones that have been recorded, the ones that have actually made it onto the derelict sites registers. There is an acute situation in my own hometown of Drogheda. An important 18th century building just 3 weeks ago was literally about to fall down, and since then the street has now been closed, neighbouring businesses have lost trade, properties that used to host shops and homes are falling. They're collapsing all around Ireland as we speak. And this is not a problem that's exclusive to my own hometown, Taoiseach. It's a national disgrace, and a national solution is required. Now, the National Planning Framework, it's very, very telling. It mentions dereliction twice, just twice. The Derelict Sites Act of 1990 is just not fit for purpose. And your own Minister for Housing, Minister O'Brien, admitted that in 2021. How? Because he set up a working group to change it, to change the Act. It's met, wait for it, on 3 occasions, just 3 occasions since 2021, and it still hasn't reported. Now, why is that the case, Taoiseach? The Derelict Sites Act is, in my view, a rogue developer's charter. The Act in many cases has, for example, allowed dodgy developers to erect hoarding around what are obviously derelict buildings, just to screen them from public view, thereby complying with the Act. Now, this is just crazy. It is absolutely bonkers. They're literally giving the 2 fingers to citizens across this country, these errant developers, and they're giving the 2 fingers to councils as well. Now, if you own a property that you've allowed to go to rack and ruin, if you can afford to let it go to rack and ruin, you're obviously rich. And the only language that some people understand is money. So these people need to be hit hard in the pockets. Revenue needs to be given the power to collect derelict sites levies. Owners that dodge the councils and the district courts need to be the responsibility of the revenue commissioners. Give these people tax compliance problems instead. Hit their businesses. Now, the Derelict Sites Act needs to be streamlined. It needs to be made it easier for councils to acquire derelict buildings before they become dangerous. And there is, I think you would agree, an environmental imperative too. Recover important buildings in our town centres before we develop new ones. Put them back into use. Now, I know you're going to talk to me about the Creagh-Conagher scheme, but the Creagh-Conagher scheme is piecemeal. It's a sticking plaster solution. That's all that it is, as is the Deficient Town Centres First programme. Now, despite my calls over many years, the Living Cities Initiative tax relief, for example, has not been extended to towns like Drogheda. Now, Taoiseach, my questions are these. Will you put a rocket, please, under Minister O'Brien and get him to publish the report of the Derelict Sites Act Working Group? Will you amend the Act and make the definition of dereliction stronger and more robust and more effective? Will you streamline the CPO process and introduce, for example, compulsory sales orders like they have in Scotland? Will you staff up councils to properly allow them to fully enforce the laws that are there? And will you give the revenue commissioners the power in law to collect levies?
Minister, please.
First of all, I think dereliction and vacancy is a key issue. But I would argue now that never has more funding been made available to a whole variety of schemes to try and end dereliction and to get urban regeneration going. In the first instance, you have the urban UDRF, Urban Regeneration Development Fund. Now, a lot of that is yet to come through in terms of the schemes. The funding has been allocated, schemes have been announced, but through design and planning, it's going to take quite some time before we'll see that on our street landscapes and in terms of our towns and cities. And then you have the Rural Regeneration and Development Fund. On top of that, of about 575 million has been invested in about 245 major projects since the government was formed, and that has supported landmark regeneration projects. About 400 million in UDRDF is currently giving assistance to 132 projects. And then you said don't mention the Conehead. That is the vacant property refurbishment grant itself. 8,300 applications now have been received by local authorities, some 5,100 already approved. That will help vacancy and dereliction in a very concrete way, and in my view, is a far more direct way in respect of some of the ideas that you've put forward, which I agree with, in terms of streamlining CPO, in terms of the Derelict Sites Act has never reached its potential. I accept your point, although I do think there's an onus and responsibility in local authorities maybe to do better in respect of proactivity on the Derelict Sites Act and the implementation of that. Again, I will talk to the Minister in respect of the working group in terms of getting that to complete and to publish the report, because that could inform some of the issues that you've highlighted as to whether or not you'd give revenue the role in terms of, but revenue are wary of being asked to do everything in terms of what may be seen as kind of social policies or policies for other departments to enact. So local authorities, if like, it's their domain, it's their jurisdiction, certainly from what I've seen on the ground, I think the derelict sites framework has not worked to the degree that it should. I think the Town Centre First initiative of the government will make a difference in towns across the length and breadth of the country. And so you have a range, you have rural regeneration development, urban regeneration development, you have Creek Cona, you have the Town and Village Renewal Scheme, which is incentivising, if you like, the bringing back to life of derelict buildings and derelict residential streets. And that's the key, I think.
Thank you, Tánaiste.
Derelict sites are the low-hanging fruit in terms of addressing the housing crisis that we have. Now, I know you visited Drogheda briefly during the local and European election campaigns, but you didn't walk down a street called Narrow West Street. And you will see in Narrow West Street in Drogheda a case study of dereliction and things that can go wrong. And you talk about resourcing up the local authorities and making sure the local authorities do the job that they're required to do under the Derelict Sites Act. That's all well and good, but you might consider resourcing them properly. Louth County Council, for example, got a total of €7 million this year in relation to its CPO agenda. Nothing close to what's required to allow that council to fulfil their own plans to acquire properties under CPO and to bring them back into use. What should be considered is, for example, the compulsory sales order idea. It's in place in Scotland. If a developer is not using the property, if it is derelict, then he is required or she is required to actually sell it on to somebody who can, in fact, use it. What we actually need is a national conversation about property interests and property rights and how that's balanced against the rights of the common good. And in the review of the Derelict Sites Act, we need to prioritise community interest, the common good and the public interest over the property rights of developers and property owners.
Deputy.
Yeah, I think there are streets across the country which do need that rebalancing in respect of the common good. Sometimes it can be through the delay in, for example, getting various projects through. I mean, you take Dublin, you take O'Connell Street, there's a major project there has been on the go for about 20 years. in terms of both retail, residential. What's the name of that company? I don't have the name now, but I mean, it's gone through dozens of committees. It's met with all cross-party committee here. No, that's more. I talk about the actual development itself, the bigger one, and that has yet to go through planning. But it's been on the agenda for about 2 decades, and that's a problem that I think speaks bigger to the dereliction question. Because when a big project is mooted and is in the works, so to speak, very little happens around it until that project gets realised. I see that in parts of Cork at the moment as well, in terms of people waiting for certain developments to take place and before they'll invest.
Thank you,
and so that's one issue, but I've no difficulty with the fundamental principle of rebalancing the rights under the Derelict Sites Act in respect of the common good.
We go now to Deputy Richard Boyd-Barrett, please.
Thanks. Last Count Corlo Tánaiste, I was grimly amused by you accusing others of ideological obsessions in the earlier question, because surely the ideological obsession that's most evident is the obsession of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael to privatise everything that moves, whether it's public land to private developers for housing, or the issue I want to raise, public service broadcasting. It's about a year now since a scandal erupted in RTE which centred on the behaviour of a tiny group of people at the top of that organisation, whether presenters or people running the organisation, of malgovernance and of obscene salaries. Now, what is the net result of that scandal, of the bad behaviour and excessive pay to a tiny group of people? We learn is the outsourcing and privatisation of the 2 flagship programmes of RTE, Fair City and The Late Late Show, and hundreds of jobs to be lost of ordinary workers who had no hand or part in the malgovernance or the obscene salaries enjoyed by a few at the top. The people who are going to lose out are the technical workers, the costume workers, the makeup workers, staging, editing, camera, scripting, floor managers, people on modest salaries, many of them having to fight for years even to get proper contracts, some of them still only on temporary contracts. These are the people who are going to lose their jobs, outsourced to the private sector, particularly ironic considering that it was the corrosive influence of the commercial sector on shows like The Late Late Show that led people to think they should be paid these obscene salaries in the first place, or that produced things like the barter accounts over business deals with the private sector. And the consequence we're now facing is the whole thing, lock, stock and barrel, is going to be handed over to the commercial for-profit sector, a sector characterised by poor working conditions, lack of pension entitlements, employment insecurity, and the workers believe, quite honestly, they're just stringing along the people in Fair City, and that this will actually be the beginning of the end of Fair City, in reality. So privatisation, the net result of bad behaviour, what you should have done and what you should still do is stop this privatising, stop the axing of job losses and fund public service broadcasting properly by imposing a tax on the profits of people like the social media companies, the ICT companies, instead of a regressive and failing TV licence funding model which is completely inadequate. So will you intervene in this to protect the jobs of ordinary workers and to safeguard the future of public service broadcasting for our society?
First of all, Deputy, I just want to make it very clear that there's a fundamental difference between outsourcing and privatisation. Fianna Fáil, by the way, has a very strong record historically of building up state enterprises and did so through various decades, particularly during the Sean Lemass era and so forth. And RT is not for sale. I don't think there's any proposal to put RT on the market or on the stock exchange. Now, that is privatisation, let's be clear. I mean, you're like Don Quixote tilting at windmills here. There is no privatisation. It's not going to be sold. It's not on the market. And what I would say is the following, that, and again, the Minister and the Government has been clear that it doesn't want mandatory redundancies. It will, RT have committed to this, that it will seek voluntary redundancies. And in terms of public funding has increased, and the Government is and will make a decision in respect of the future funding of RT into the future, which has always been part RT licence fee, part exchequer funding and part commercial revenue. And RT have always taken in commercial revenues for many, many decades, and you know that, Deputy, and that's been a feature of the model. And RT has outsourced. It is now proposing in its latest strategy to increase the level of content produced by the independent production sector, and that was signalled in the strategic vision document which the broadcaster published last November. And secondly, it had already been recommended by the Future Media Commission, which was established to consider the significant challenges facing the wider broadcasting and media sector in light of increasing globalised competition, and to make recommendations so we could continue to have a sustainable public sector broadcaster and public service content. So if you take TG Carr, for example, which I think has been a very innovative state-owned company, it uses that model quite extensively. It sources almost its entire schedule from the independent sector. And so I think we need a balance, although I do accept the need for in-house talent to be developed within RT itself. I do accept that principle. In terms of the skill sets and making sure people have continuing professional development, people are retrained and so on like that. All of that is provided for within the RT strategy itself, because it does commit to increasing the amount of RT content, for example, that is produced outside of Dublin, which is important and which I welcome in terms of new proposals for Cork and indeed other cities and areas across the country. Now, in the end of the day, RT has to manage its affairs. I don't think the operational management of RT can be undertaken by the Oireachtas or indeed by government for that matter. What government does have to do is look at the overall strategic framework in terms of policy, but also in terms of funding. And government will be making its decision on that in the next number of weeks.
Deputy Boyd-Barrett.
So the government washes their hands. See, the government is responsible for not reining in the excessive, the obscene salaries that everybody knew about at the top of RTE, whether it was executives or a tiny number of overpaid presenters. But now the people who are getting it in the neck are precisely the skilled people, the ordinary workers. They're the ones who are going to lose their jobs, and they are going to go into an independent private sector which is characterised by the gig economy, by project to project. I don't know how many times I've raised the insecurity that workers face in the rest of the audiovisual sector. The producers do very well, but the workers don't know if they have a job from one project to another. So we're going to go from a situation where people have decent, relatively secure jobs, although not all of them, because they had to fight and campaign against bogus self-employment and contract work. What will happen to those contractors? Will they get redundancy? No, they won't. Will they get any guarantee to be passed on to these programmes? No, they won't. Fair City, the flagship programmes, Late Show will now become more reliant on the private advertisers, on the commercial sector, undermining the fundamental ethos of public service broadcasting. And it won't stop at 400 jobs, because many of those people are ancillary workers who work both in Fair City and work in other areas of RTE. Their jobs will be under threat as well. Will you intervene to protect public service broadcasting, decent jobs for the workers there, and make sure they're not the victims, and fund this thing properly by taxing the social media companies who do need taxes on their obscene profits?
Social media companies employ thousands in this country as well, and your general taxation proposals would, I think, reduce foreign direct investment to this country to zero if you got into a position where you would tax the living daylights out of companies generally, which is your policy. Fair enough, and you're entitled to your political ideological perspective. No, I don't. No. Sorry, again, I didn't interrupt, Deputy, and I'm talking to Deputy Boyd-Barrett, who's the leader for this morning. You might be leader next week, but today it's Deputy Boyd-Barrett. And I just want to make the point that it has been long-standing policy, by the way, to support the independent sector. Now, you may be against that. You may be against the idea of innovation within the protection. No, sorry. It's always been a view that we support the independent sector. No, I believe in a strong public service broadcaster. I also believe in public service broadcasting and content. And into the future, it will not just be the public service broadcaster, but we should support public service content through a variety of schemes in the print sector and in local radio and other national stations where there is genuine public service content, because that's important for democracy. I mean, we've had the Sound and Vision scheme, which has been long-standing there now, which is funded through the TV licence receipts, and we have new schemes are coming on board to support local democracy, court reporting, as recommended by the Future Media Commission. So there's potential here, Deputy, to do the right thing, to sustain employment and decent quality of life and employment for people as well. Sorry, Deputy.
Deputy Marian Harkin, please.
Taoiseach, I've raised the issue of the pain clinic at Sligo University Hospital with you and the Minister for Health 3 times back in 2022, when there were 2 service interruptions to the pain clinic, and previously, of course, when it was closed during COVID. Now, those issues were resolved and the service resumed. However, just over 4 weeks ago, I received some information that there might be a reduction in service in the pain clinic, and perhaps there'd be fewer consultants there. So I put down 3 questions to the Minister seeking information about the number of consultants, possible reduction in service, etc. Needless to say, I have still got no reply. But this week, the news broke on a local media that the pain clinic is to close tomorrow. Now, since then, CELTA have come back to say that it's a temporary closure, and while I welcome that, I will come back to it in a moment. But when I put down those 3 questions, I put down another one to ask how the Minister would alleviate the waiting lists, the backlog of people waiting to access the pain clinic in the first place. And I did receive a response on that to tell me there were 341 patients on the SUH outpatient list and 107 on the inpatient. So, Taoiseach, before there was any talk of closure, we're looking at 448 people on a waiting list, as well as all of those accessing the service. And many patients are really concerned at the closure, even temporary, because the service for them is literally their lifeline. As you know, chronic pain is often invisible and people feel very isolated. It takes on average about 4 years to get a diagnosis from when you go to see your GP to when you get to see a consultant, and then you're on a waiting list. And to think that the service that you rely on, and you can't go anywhere else, that service would be pulled. So, Taoiseach, I have a few questions to ask you. First of all, what are the alternative arrangements for those currently accessing the service? Will they be able to see their current consultant? Has a changeover of information, all of that, has that been sorted? Secondly, what's going to happen to those on the waiting list? Have they received any communication about what is going to happen next and where do they go? My third question is, why didn't CELTA ensure a continuum of service? They had to know that some of these consultants were departing. They tell us that they're recruiting consultants at the moment, but we know that recruitment can take 6, 12, 18 months.
Thank you, Deputy.
While we're told it's temporary, Taoiseach, people have seen this pain clinic close before, they've waited and they've waited. And once again, no notice to patients,
Deputy,
nothing,
please.
and people just are not interested in hearing about we're in the process of recruiting.
Thank the Deputy for raising this issue. I think chronic pain is a devastating condition for people because it's long-term. And it's one that thankfully there's been significant development over the last decade or so, but it took a long time to, if you like, get a proper base within our health service more generally. But and the reason for the temporary closure of this service is that the 2 consultant doctors providing the chronic pain service in Sligo, as you have said, University Hospital are both moving to new roles. The HSE advises that recruitment to fill these posts is ongoing and everything is being done to minimise impact on patients. And just to stress, the refilling of these posts is not impacted at all by any recruitment pause or anything like that. As an interim measure, and until the new consultants are in post, alternative arrangements are being put in place for patients who are currently attending the service. And these arrangements include appointments being offered in Kingsbridge, Sligo for procedures, and exploring outsourcing with the National Treatment Purchase Fund. A locum consultant will commence in July to oversee the governance of the pain management and education and a psychologically based rehabilitative treatment for people with persistent pain. And we will continue to invest in Sligo University Hospital, and we're committed to it. Staffing at the hospital has grown by about 379 since January 2020, from 1,677 to 2,056 in January. That's a 22.5% increase in the staffing in the hospital. And since 2022, this includes 50 more nurses and midwives, 33 more medical and dental staff, and 5 more patient care staff, as well as 13 more health and social care professionals. The budget's gone from about 159 million back in 2020 to 187 million, which is a 17% increase, a 28 million increase in just 4 years. And 27 new beds have opened and so forth. And in terms of the National Treatment Purchase Fund, it has advised the Department of Health that three pain relief insourcing initiatives have been approved for the sale to hospital group, 2 OPD and 1 IPDC, which will facilitate treatment for 580 patients on pain relief waiting lists. Now, there are about 341 on the Sligo University Hospital outpatient pain relief waiting lists, and about 78% are waiting 6 months or less. And there's about 107 patients on the Sligo University Hospital inpatient day case pain relief waiting lists, and about 61% of them are waiting 6 months or less. Now, I do take your point that, and I'm not aware of the background as to why the 2 consultants essentially seem to have left at the same time or moved on to different portfolios, as to whether that was anticipated or expected. I think it's a reasonable point you make that it should have been anticipated, and maybe recruitment could have begun earlier to coincide with consultants leaving.
Thank you, Tánaiste. Deputy Harkin.
Thank you, Tánaiste. And you did say progress had been made, and some progress has. But Tánaiste, you may or may not be aware, there's been a change in the international classification of diseases on chronic pain. We've gone from what they call ICD-10 to ICD-11, where chronic pain is now recognised as a disease in its own right, as distinct from a symptom of another disease. And I know that our response in Ireland has to be to put in place a pilot programme, but that's all we've done. If you look at other countries worldwide, while you say we've made progress, Ireland is not a good place for those who suffer from chronic pain. And I really think it needs to move to the top of the agenda, because you're telling me that CELTA have various initiatives, they're looking to recruit consultants, they've approved this, they've approved that, but I can tell you that patients in chronic pain in Sligo, Leitrim, Donegal, because it covers that entire area, wait long times to get access to a clinic. There have been many stoppages in the service, and now, with no notice, it's gone. Yes, they're promised the closure is temporary. I want an absolute guarantee that that's
Thank you,
the
Deputy.
case.
The time is up now, please.
Deputy, as I said earlier, the locum will be appointed in July. Arrangements include, for those, in terms of alternative arrangements, for appointments being offered in Kingsbridge, and then the NTPF is also has a number of schemes for the CELTA group that should also help in terms of providing treatment to people. I don't disagree with your fundamental point about the importance of pain management, and as you say, it's a disease in itself now, but it has very significant implications for patients, those who have persistent pain or chronic pain. It hasn't, over the last decade or so, from where it was, very embryonic service, it I think has improved significantly. It's very unfortunate that 2 would leave at the one time. And I think every effort must be made to accelerate the recruitment of permanent replacements for those 2 consultants who have left. In the meantime, we've got to use the locum system and also the NTPF and funding for the NTPF.
Thank you, Tánaiste. That concludes leaders' questions. We move to questions.